Have you ever stood in front of someone who disrespected you and felt your calm tremble, your chest burn, your mind begging to respond? I've been there, caught between pride and peace. But over time, I learned something few ever master. Power doesn't come from speaking, it comes from silence. Stay with me and I'll show you why. As we step into the first chapter, picture this: a room that once felt warm, now carries an invisible chill. The air is thick with words left unsaid, with the quiet realization that something has shifted. You no longer owe anyone your explanation. You no longer need to prove that your kindness has limits. You simply stop showing up, not in anger, not in revenge, but in clarity. You've seen the pattern too many times, the disrespect wrapped in familiarity, the small tests that chip away at your peace. And this time, instead of reacting, you rise into silence. That's where true power begins. The world teaches noise, it rewards reaction. But Stoicism teaches the art of restraint, the kind of strength that doesn't roar, it breathes. As Epictetus wrote, we suffer not from events, but from our judgments about them. The Stoic doesn't retreat to hide. He withdraws to preserve, because your energy was never a public service, and your presence was never a gift to be taken for granted. Now imagine this moment: someone crosses the line one more time. They do it because they believe you'll stay. They've mistaken your patience for permission. They've built a rhythm out of your forgiveness, a pattern out of your empathy. They rely on your silence to continue their chaos. They depend on your steadiness because it feeds their instability. And then, without warning, you stop. No announcement, no closure, just stillness. That stillness, that invisible line you draw, becomes the first echo of freedom. Withdrawal, when done from calm understanding, is not weakness, it's mastery. You're not retreating from life, you're reclaiming your peace. The Stoics believed that mastery over self is the only true freedom. When you step back without resentment, you change the entire emotional landscape. It's not dramatic, it's not cruel, it's clean. You remove their access to your presence, and suddenly they must face what they've been avoiding all along: themselves. Most people live inside emotional scripts. They expect your reaction like a cue in a play: your defense, your tears, your explanation. Each reaction gives them a role to perform, a stage to stand on. But when you vanish from that play, the stage collapses. There's no audience left for their performance, no mirror to validate their behavior. That's when the silence becomes unbearable, because silence forces self-reflection, and self-reflection is what most people fear the most. Epictetus would call this choosing conscious suffering over reactionary chaos. You trade the short pain of detachment for the long decay of disrespect. That's wisdom. The ego wants to be understood. Wisdom wants peace. When you stop explaining, you stop negotiating your worth. When you disappear from the noise, your absence becomes a mirror. It doesn't accuse, it reflects. And in that reflection, they finally see what you saw all along: the harm they caused, the emptiness beneath their control. You begin to understand that silence is not avoidance, it's alignment. You're not running from confrontation, you're refusing to speak a language that no longer deserves your voice. This is where the Stoic discipline becomes personal. It's not about controlling others, it's about controlling the temptation to prove your value to those who can't recognize it. I once heard a quiet story about a man who spent years trying to repair a friendship that had long decayed. Every conversation ended in misunderstanding. Every effort to explain himself only made the distance wider. One day he decided not to respond at all. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to peace. He said later, I finally understood that the explanation they needed was my absence. That is the essence of Stoicism, letting silence do the work that words never could. This kind of withdrawal terrifies those who live off your energy. They can't comprehend peace that doesn't beg, love that doesn't chase, or dignity that doesn't shout. But that's your turning point. You're not punishing anyone, you're preserving yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And that's what you're doing. You refuse to become reactive. You refuse to let their behavior rewrite your character. You rise quietly, firmly, and without apology. Yes, it's hard, especially when the person is someone close, a friend, a lover, even family. You want to explain, to be understood, to be seen one last time, but that desire is where the ego hides. The Stoics would tell you cannot control perception, only intention. Your peace cannot depend on someone else's understanding. So when you walk away, you do so not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring in the right direction. There's a strange kind of strength in being misunderstood and staying silent. It feels unnatural at first, almost painful. But over time, you begin to see the wisdom of it. The pain of detachment fades, the peace of distance grows, and one day you realize you didn't lose them, you found yourself. When you withdraw without anger, without spectacle, something profound happens. You leave behind not bitterness, but truth. They'll remember your stillness long after your words would have been forgotten. They'll remember that you didn't beg, that you didn't chase, that your silence said everything that needed to be said. That's when regret begins. Not because you wounded them, but because they finally see the strength they underestimated. Think back to all the times you stayed too long, hoping someone would see your worth. How many times did you give them another chance, thinking patience would heal what clarity should have ended? Where did that lead you? To exhaustion. But Stoicism offers you a new direction. It tells you to honor your peace like a sacred space. To remember that walking away isn't weakness, it's self-respect. It's not giving up, it's leveling up. So the next time you feel the urge to argue, to explain, to fix, don't. Step back, withdraw quietly, let your absence speak, because silence, when born from self-mastery, becomes the loudest language there is, and when they finally realize they no longer have access to your time, your mind, your heart, that's when the lesson lands. It's not revenge, it's evolution. It's not bitterness, it's boundaries. From here, something deeper begins. It's not just about leaving, it's about rising. Because once you master the art of withdrawal, the next move is even more powerful, leveling up in private. And that's where true transformation begins. Moving into the second chapter, the silence deepens. It's no longer about walking away, it's about what happens after. Picture the quiet that follows a storm. The air is still, the world feels paused, and within that stillness, something inside you begins to rebuild. Growth in silence. It's one of the most misunderstood forms of power because it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't post its progress. It simply becomes undeniable. Most people live loudly. They perform, they prove, they parade their lives before others as if applause could make them whole. But there's a rare kind of strength in those who evolve behind closed doors. In a world obsessed with showing, you choose to become. Quietly, slowly, like a seed breaking open beneath the soil, unseen yet unstoppable. That's what disturbs those who once disrespected you. They can't see you anymore, yet somehow they still feel your movement. They were counting on your noise, on your need to prove them wrong. on your habit of explaining yourself, of returning to defend your worth. They depended on your wounds to keep you visible, because as long as you were hurt, you were reachable. As long as you were emotional, you were predictable. But what happens when that version of you disappears? When your life begins to move without them and you say nothing? That's when the shift begins. The Stoics called this freedom of the soul. Epictetus taught that while praise, insult, or recognition are beyond our control, mastery over our choices and focus is entirely ours. You stop chasing explanations. You stop defending what peace needs no defense. You turn inward. And in doing so, you enter the space the Stoics cherished most, the inner citadel. The mind unbothered by the noise of the crowd. This unnerves people. They may pretend not to notice, but they do. They feel it in the way your absence hums like a quiet reminder of their own stagnation. They whisper to themselves, "It's just a phase." They'll come back, but this isn't a mood. This is a shift, and shifts, once embodied, don't reverse. Let me tell you something about energy. Before you orbited their moods, their drama, their gravity. But when you realign your focus, you become a planet with your own pull. You stop revolving around others and start rotating on your own axis. And suddenly, the balance of power changes. They feel it, but they can't name it. I remember once hearing of a woman who, after years of explaining herself to those who never listened, simply stopped. She deleted no one. She argued with no one. She just began to rise quietly. New habits, new books, new morning light. At first, they joked, "She's just being dramatic." Then, months later, their laughter turned to silence. Her peace became louder than their noise. Her stillness more magnetic than their chaos. That's the essence of Stoic growth. You don't need to fight for recognition. You outgrow the arena where the fight even matters. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." In your silence, you stop discussing your transformation. You become it. And here's the beauty of it. Real growth never seeks witnesses. The tree doesn't brag about its roots. The sunrise doesn't need an audience to rise. It simply does. Every quiet choice you make, to stay focused, to stay disciplined, to stay kind when bitterness would be easier, becomes another stone laid in the foundation of your freedom. They'll start to notice, slowly, in unsettling ways. The way you walk differently, the steadiness in your tone, the way your eyes no longer ask for understanding. The old version of you, the one that reacted, the one that justified, is gone. They can't reach you because they no longer know where to touch you. That confusion is their consequence. You've shifted from needing to be heard to knowing you are whole. You've stopped attending every argument you're invited to. You've stopped explaining what time has already proven. The person you were, the one who needed validation, has dissolved. What remains is calm, focused, sovereign, and that quiet unnerves them more than any confrontation ever could. Because when someone thrives on your emotional availability, your silence becomes starvation. They feel your distance as loss. They begin to regret not your absence, but everything they did that created it. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." That's exactly what you're doing now. You're not performing peace, you're practicing it. You're not chasing revenge, you're chasing depth. While others seek applause, you seek alignment. While they chase the illusion of control, you cultivate mastery of self. Understand this. Choosing to grow quietly doesn't mean you're hiding. It means you've realized that peace needs privacy. Healing requires silence. Progress demands solitude. You're not ignoring anyone, you've simply stopped orbiting around those who pull you away from yourself. Your life begins to shift in ways words can't describe. You sleep deeper, you speak less, you choose your company with intention. You understand that not every loss is a wound, some are release. The old you needed closure. The new you understands that silence is closure. They'll feel it when you walk into a room and don't look for them, when your laughter no longer sounds like trying, when your calm presence exposes the noise of their own unrest. That's when they realize what they've lost. Not a person, but the peace your presence carried. And while they wrestle with that absence, you keep moving forward. Not out of pride, but purpose. You're reading, reflecting, building, living. You're creating a life so full that you no longer have room for the chaos that once defined you. That's what Stoic freedom looks like. Not running from the world, but mastering your response to it. Not withdrawing in bitterness, but advancing in clarity. The transformation happens quietly, deeply, consistently, until the old you feels like a story you once told. The truth is simple. The more you grow in silence, the less you owe anyone an explanation. Because your life, your peace, your discipline, they speak for you now. And when they ask what happened, you won't need to answer. Your calm will be the response. This is the second move. Growth in silence, not revenge, not retreat, renewal. From here, the evolution continues, because true Stoic strength isn't just about what you stop giving others, it's about what you stop feeling for them. That next stage, when detachment becomes your protection and your peace turns to power, that's where we're heading next. Advancing to the third chapter, there comes a moment when your silence changes shape. It stops being a pause and becomes a decision, not one born of exhaustion or defeat, but of power. You no longer explain, defend, or respond. You no longer step into the ring where emotions are thrown like punches. You've outgrown the fight, and the world feels it. The shift in your energy, the way you no longer flinch when provoked, the calm that unsettles those who once thrived on your reaction. This is what Epictetus called emotional sovereignty, the quiet dominion over your inner state, the refusal to let anyone else sit at the throne of your peace. Most people hand out access to their emotions like free samples, reacting to every opinion, every jab, every petty remark. They let others become puppeteers, pulling invisible strings of anger, jealousy, or pride. But the Stoic walks a different path. He learns to see the storm and not become it, to feel the wind but not be carried away by it. Imagine standing in the middle of chaos, voices rising, egos clashing, judgment flying like arrows, yet your mind stays clear, unmoved, anchored. You've learned what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength is not in shouting louder, it's in choosing silence over impulse, clarity over chaos. When you withdraw your emotions from those who haven't earned the right to touch them, something profound happens. Their noise grows louder, but it no longer reaches you. They used to push your buttons and wait for the familiar response, anger, explanation, apology. Now there's nothing, just space, stillness, reflection. And that silence becomes their mirror. It shows them what their behavior truly looks like without your emotional cushion softening it. This is not coldness, it's discipline. It's the difference between feeling everything and offering nothing to those who weaponize your feelings. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress emotion, it teaches you to direct it, to move from reaction to regulation. You begin to choose where your energy flows, like a river carving its own path through stone. I once heard of a man who was publicly insulted by someone who envied him. Everyone waited for his response, expecting fire, but he only smiled and said, "That's one opinion." Then he turned back to his work. Days later, the insult was forgotten, but his composure was remembered. That is the quiet power of emotional unavailability. It disarms without words. The Stoics understood this deeply. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free, and freedom begins when you stop being enslaved by the moods of others, when you no longer chase validation, when you no longer let someone's disrespect dictate your peace. That's bravery, that's mastery." You start to notice the change in yourself. The things that once disturbed you now glance off you like dull arrows. The comments that once provoked you barely register, not because you've become numb, but because you've learned to care correctly. Their opinions no longer define your worth. Their recognition no longer feels necessary. You've shifted from seeking emotional justice to practicing inner justice. That's when confusion begins, for them. They can't understand how you became untouchable. They whisper that you've changed. They call it arrogance. But you know it's alignment. You've simply stopped explaining storms to those still addicted to thunder. And while they gossip, provoke, or spiral, you're somewhere else reading, building, living with intention. You've learned the value of conserving your emotional energy, of guarding your peace like a sacred temple. Because once you've tasted the stillness that comes from restraint, chaos loses its flavor. There's a story I hold close. A young philosopher once asked his teacher how to defeat those who mock or provoke him. The teacher smiled and said, "Do not fight the echo. Walk away and it will fade." That's emotional detachment. You no longer fight every sound. You let it die in the silence of your absence. As time passes, you begin to see the truth. Peace doesn't mean nothing happens around you. It means nothing controls you within. You've stepped out of the ring where emotions are traded like blows. You now stand above it, observing without being pulled in. That's not avoidance, it's evolution. And make no mistake, this shift shakes the world around you. The people who thrived on your reactions feel the cold first. They sense the door has closed, though they never heard it shut. They feel the space where your emotions used to meet their chaos. And that emptiness, that quiet, becomes their lesson. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to explain it. You simply stop attending every conflict you're invited to. You refuse to participate in your own disturbance. And over time, they realize your silence isn't weakness, it's command. You've chosen something far greater than winning arguments. You've chosen mastery. Epictetus called it freedom of the mind. It's when your peace no longer depends on anyone's approval, apology, or understanding. When the storm outside rages and you remain still within. That's victory, not in their eyes, but in your own. Because now you understand that serenity is not given, it's guarded. You don't owe them your anger. You don't owe them your clarity. You owe yourself consistency. This is the third move, emotional sovereignty. It's where your silence becomes strength and your composure, your loudest voice. And from here, we advance once more. Because while being emotionally unavailable frees you, setting silent boundaries is what keeps you free. That's where your transformation takes root, in the power to walk in peace without ever needing to explain it. Entering the fourth chapter, you begin to understand that silence isn't just for peace, it's for structure. There's a quiet kind of power that rises when you start setting boundaries and stop explaining them. You no longer draw lines in sand for others to erase. You carve them in stone for yourself to honor. Because the truth is simple, those who genuinely respect you don't need a speech to understand your limits. It's the ones who benefited from your lack of them who will notice the change first. When you finally decide to stop overextending, stop absorbing disrespect just to keep the peace, you'll feel it before they do, the weight lifting, the mind unclenching. You stop being available for chaos disguised as connection. You stop offering your patience to those who treat it like a weakness, and you do it quietly, not in anger, not to prove a point. But because you've learned that real clarity doesn't shout, it simply acts. Here's the test when someone crosses you. The instinct is to explain. You want them to see how much they've hurt you, to understand, so they might change. But that instinct, though human, is the very trap that binds you. Because the moment you start explaining your boundaries to someone who thrives on crossing them, you're already back in their game. You're arguing for your dignity when it was never up for debate. Epictetus, the Stoic master of composure, once said that peace requires no permission, only decision. That decision is best made in silence. You don't need to teach someone how to value you. You teach yourself by refusing to stay where you're diminished. True boundaries aren't about controlling others. They're about mastering your own exposure. You begin to withdraw, not out of bitterness, but out of alignment. You stop replying to the messages that drain you. You stop saying yes when your heart quietly says no. You stop attending every emotional storm you're invited to. Each quiet withdrawal is an act of reclamation, a way of saying, my energy matters now. At first, they won't understand. They'll call you distant, moody, ungrateful. But as the silence deepens, they'll begin to feel what's really happening. They'll sense the shift, not because you announced it, but because the access they once had is gone. What once came easily, your attention, your forgiveness, your time, now costs something respect. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." You no longer give what feels wrong. You no longer defend what feels true. You move in quiet alignment with your values. That's integrity. That's freedom. Setting silent boundaries might be the hardest discipline of all, not because it's complex, but because it requires restraint. You have to resist the urge to justify your peace to those who profit from your unrest. You must choose discomfort now, the discomfort of being misunderstood, so you don't have to carry resentment later. I remember meeting a man who once said, "I stopped explaining my worth the day I realized the right people never made me." He told me he lost friends when he stopped being the fixer, the listener, the one who always made things right. But what he gained was something rarer: quiet mornings, lighter thoughts, unbothered evenings. Peace didn't arrive as applause. It came as stillness. That's the beauty of Stoic discipline. It doesn't demand recognition. It transforms you inwardly until your silence speaks for you. Those who truly love you will adjust. Those who only loved your compliance will fade. Let them. Because here's what Stoicism teaches that most people never grasp: revenge is emotional debt. It ties you to the same people you've outgrown. You keep replaying the scene, reliving the hurt, re-arguing the injustice. But in doing so, you keep them alive inside your mind. That's bondage, not closure. Epictetus would tell you to let it go, to align action with virtue and move forward. No need for dramatic exits or moral victories, just a quiet departure from what no longer honors you. That's the cleanest freedom there is. And as you hold that silence, something subtle begins to shift around you. The world mirrors your inner state. Chaos recedes. Clarity grows. The kind of people who match your energy begin to appear naturally, not because you chase them, but because you've made space for them. The peace that once felt distant becomes familiar. You start to notice that the world responds differently to someone who respects their own boundaries. The tone of conversations changes. The air around you feels lighter. It's not magic, it's alignment. Then one day, someone who once took you for granted tries to reach back in. They test the waters, curious if the old access remains, but it doesn't. Not because you're bitter, but because the gap between who you were and who you've become is now too wide for them to cross. You've outgrown the noise. You've outgrown the need to be understood. You become someone whose peace is sacred. And once you reach that stillness, you realize something deeper. This isn't the end of your detachment. It's the beginning of grace. Because there's one final step left in this transformation, not just withdrawing, not just setting boundaries, but disappearing with dignity. That's the final act, the quietest, most haunting move of all, the one they feel long after you're gone. At this stage, silence stops being strength. It becomes survival. There comes a time when words no longer heal, when explaining becomes a form of begging, and when peace demands distance. You've given everything silence could offer, yet they continue to test your limits, ignore your worth, and expect your loyalty. That's when you understand the wisest act isn't to fight back, it's to leave. Not with anger or noise, just quietly, completely, and with dignity. Epictetus called this the final act of self-respect. The moment you stop betraying yourself to protect someone else's comfort. Leaving isn't running, it's returning. Returning to the self that values peace more than approval. The Stoics taught that showing up for those who dishonor you isn't compassion, it's self-neglect, and no one can live freely while chained to disrespect. Those who mistreat you rely on your reaction. They count on your explanations, your patience, your predictable forgiveness. They depend on your silence to continue the cycle. But once your silence becomes a decision, not a pause, everything changes. You stop defending your worth and walk away in quiet certainty. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Walking away quietly is both right and true. You don't owe anyone your presence where your peace is not protected. You step back from every conversation that drains you, every effort that keeps you small. At first they won't notice. Then confusion sets in. Your calm unsettles them. Your silence confronts them. They feel the loss of something they never respected, the steadiness of your presence. Your absence forces them to face the truth you once spoke in vain. You didn't yell, you didn't argue, you simply left. And in that silence, the truth speaks louder than any defense ever could. Seneca said, "He who is brave is free." Freedom begins the moment you no longer seek closure from those who shattered it. You stop waiting for apologies. You stop hoping they'll see your worth. Because now you do. You don't fix what you didn't break. You don't explain what should have been obvious. Leaving isn't revenge. It's self-respect. Disappearing with dignity isn't cruelty. It's clarity. It's choosing to protect what's sacred inside you, even if it means being misunderstood. I once knew someone who stayed in a painful friendship far too long. Every argument ended the same, promises followed by disappointment. One day, she stopped explaining. No goodbye, no closure, no last message. She simply left. Months later, she said, Peace isn't something you ask for. It's something you take back. That's what this kind of silence feels like. Not emptiness, but return. To disappear with dignity is not to avoid the world, it's to master yourself. The Stoics called it self-command, the power to walk away from what wounds you, even if your heart still cares. It's not escape, it's elevation. You learn that peace doesn't need witnesses, it needs will. And yes, they'll notice. At first, they'll test the silence, subtle messages, indirect questions, attempts to reopen old doors. But by then, you've outgrown the pattern. You no longer need to explain evolution to those who refuse to grow beside you. You start to feel the air clear. The noise fades. Your thoughts sharpen. You begin to rebuild, not around them, but around yourself. The energy you once gave away is now the fire that fuels your purpose. You begin to understand what Epictetus meant when he said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." You no longer need to punish or prove. You simply exist in peace, and that in itself becomes your power. Because peace unsettles those who live in chaos. Stillness exposes noise, and absence teaches louder than presence ever could. Over time, they'll feel it. When your name no longer appears, when your attention no longer arrives, when your calm no longer revolves around their storms, they'll realize your presence was never an obligation, it was a gift they lost, not in one moment, but through countless small choices to take it for granted. But by then, it won't matter. You'll be gone, not hiding, but living, lighter, wiser, whole. You'll realize silence is freedom itself. This is the final Stoic transformation. You've gone from tolerating to detaching, from reacting to rising, from explaining to enforcing, and now from engaging to exiting. You don't slam the door. You close it gently but completely. And once it's shut, it stays shut. You don't leave space for confusion. You leave space for growth, theirs if they choose it, but more importantly, yours. Your disappearance isn't revenge, it's rebirth. Because every ending chosen in peace becomes the foundation of a freer life. So when someone underestimates your worth, remember, you owe no one access to your soul. Let your silence become the loudest message they'll ever hear. As Epictetus said, the greatest freedom is choosing who and what you allow into your peace. When you walk away from what wounds you, you walk toward what heals you. Nothing to prove, nothing to say, only peace that stays. If this message helped you see your worth with new clarity, pause for a moment and let that quiet strength fill you completely. What you felt wasn't anger, it was awakening. Every time you choose silence instead of reaction, you are not retreating, you are reclaiming your power. That calm inside you is not emptiness, it is mastery taking form. You no longer need to prove your peace, you only need to protect it. If these words resonated with you, subscribe and stay connected so we can keep walking this path of strength and stillness together. Share this with someone who's ready to rise quietly and live with self-respect. And in the comments, write silent power. Let that remind you that peace is your armor, silence your weapon, and presence your victory. Keep rising in calm certainty, for your silence now speaks everything.